Well, greetings! It is I, Tantus Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor, and welcoming you once again. We're talking tabletop today. I'm sipping iced tea, as I usually am for these things, and hoping that my nose doesn't stuff up. But yes, today is going to be an interesting one, because I considered, today was going to be more Pathfinder talk. I considered another country, another major topic, but I came up with an idea of what we're talking about today, and it's an important one that a lot of people don't think about, but it does paint a picture. And that's talking about the Pathfinder world of Golarion as a whole. Yes, I'm talking about an entire goddamn planet. The basics of it, a little bit of the cosmology around it. Cosmology is probably not the word. Things like the solar system, its moon, its continents, its major oceans. We're going to go over a bunch of basics about things. And yes, there are plenty of continents and some information that I'm not going to dive too deep into because there is information to talk of. And I have, of course, with a couple of pictures which are official Pathfinder pictures and a couple more world pictures that are based upon that one, which are a little bit more fan-made, but we'll go over and see a lot of those images, and we'll learn a lot about what the entire planet of Golarion is. Because when I talk about countries, when I've talked about Ustalav, or Drumo, or Chelix, or Tianzi and their various countries, and the places on Garund, and I mention all these names, having a basis to start with is probably a really great idea. I can talk out of my butt about all these kind of things, but if you do not know the world area and a lot of the things that exist, it kind of cuts stuff off. So why don't we start right here, right now, dive right into it. I'll move myself up here, and we'll go over the first of many images I'll be showing off here. I think that's the right one. There we go. This is the first of the many things that we're going to be speaking about, but this kind of hits us. This is the solar system of Golarion. So, Golarion here orbits a yellow sun, very similar to us. It is the third of 11 planets in orbit around this sun. It is a planet very similar to our own, with blue vast oceans, green lands. It is a very life-rich planet. It is the most populous planet in the entire solar system that Golarion is part of. It has a single moon, very similar to ours, a crater-scarred moon called Somel, which we'll talk about in a minute. And, of course, as you can see here, its nearest neighbors are Castrovel the Green and Akaton the Red planet of the solar system. So, Golarion is known by the astronomers and diviners of the planet Golarion as the child, as there's seemingly the paradise-related things, or the environment which encourages life the most is thought to be the work of the gods and stuff, while a lot of other planets refer to Golarion as the cage because it has the cosmic role of being the cage for the mad god Rovogug, the apocalypse god, who's at the center of Golarion's planet. That's a thing that we can continue to talk about, but that's not right now. That we've got a mad, apocalypse god at the center of your planet. But we do, just wants to destroy all of creation. So, yeah. The solar system here, as you can see, the planets are Avalon the Horse, Castroval the Green, Golarion itself, Akaton the Red. Versus the line, the Diaspora is actually the remains of two planets that were destroyed, Damira and Ivoa. They form the asteroid belt that's called the Diaspora. Then there's Traxius the Wanderer, Lavaria the Dreamer, Bretha the Cradle, Apostate the Messenger, and Octarn the Stranger. This is the basic thing. I'm not going to go into the other planets right now. There may be times which I will go into some of these other planets and give you some basic idea, because certainly these show up in something more like Starfinder, but because of the nature of this kind of connectivity between things and some of the magics between them, certainly in a Pathfinder game, you could find yourself on one of these other planets. It's not an impossibility to travel to one of these and find yourself there. There are things on these planets, inhabitants and various stuff like that. Certainly, planets like Castrovel, it has a lot of stuff on it. It can be described as a very busy planet. Same with Akaton. Is it the most inhabited? No, none of them are. Golarion is the most inhabited. And, then you've got Eox, which is, a planet of undead, honestly. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff to unpack in this entire thing, and that's not what we're doing today. That might be another episode where we talk about the Golarion solar system. But having this basis of the solar system is a good idea because it kind of puts you in a mindset. Similar to our own, it is the third planet, but unlike our own, it has 11 planets in the system. The moon itself, Somel, that's the name that the Aslanti gave it. It's a tide-locked moon, so it's always got the one side facing it. It's got a dark side of the moon. There is one major thing that is on the moon scar. So that is something that actually comes up. It is basically a jungle on Golarion's light side of the moon. The moon is a crater-rocked dirt ball, like kind of similar to Earth, except for this one area where there's this mountain range or canyon kind of area that's kind of heavily shadowed. It's a jungle. About 12,000 years ago, there was disaster and an invasion of the moon by the Abyss, because demons. So the forest is basically home to, this jungle is home to demons, abyssal plants, monsters. It's dominated by succubus-mothered half-fiends who threaten the people of Golarion, that often travel from the moon to Golarion to snatch victims to basically breed more half-fiends. Some of the victims do return after being horribly corrupted. It's a thing that's on the moon. Look, ageless creatures like demons can just travel there. Via magical flight, it takes 2 years. There's those that are sent there, or, a lot of stuff happens. So it's basically these main rulers of this scar on the moon are from this single succubus ancestor who kind of rules over the ecosystem here. And it's an awful, awful place. But that's the moon. Otherwise, the moon is just a lot like our own moon, except for, demon jungle. But that's basically what we talk about when we talk about the Golarion solar system, the area around it, and, the moon of Golarion, which is an important part. But now we have to turn to Golarion itself, and let us look at the first of many maps, which I'm going to have to readjust here. This one, definitely. This is that's the wrong part here. An official map that was created via Paizo of the Golarion world. So this is the map that gives everybody that makes a map of Golarion the first look at it. If you're interested where this map comes from, it was originally printed in the Inner Sea World Guide back in 2011. So it is a classic book that, you could get and check out. It has this world map of Golarion itself, and that was where a lot of the sources of this stuff up. So this is a 12-year-old map that gives a general idea of the shape of Golarion and its continents. And the continents are, of course, Arcadia, Avastine, Aslant is the Ruined Continent, Casmaron, the Crown of the World, Grund, Saracen, and Tianzi. Those are the 8 continents that kind of make up all of Golarion. There are 5 great oceans too. The Anatokos Ocean, which is in the southern hemisphere and South Pole. I'd kind of describe that out. So that's the bottom of the map there. The Arcadian Ocean, which is west of Avanci and Garun and east of Arcadia, and that's the area that surrounds Aslant. Remember, Aslant, that's destroyed continent where the Aslanti were. That's what happened in the Earthfall. We've talked about that sort of in other places, in other videos that have talked about Pathfinder stuff. But that's that ocean there. The Emerald Ocean touches Kamsarum, Tianzi, and Sassuran. So that is found, it's kind of to the east side, kind of in the middle there, that kind of stretches up all the way to the crown of the world, the kind of that ocean there. The Ubari Ocean is between Gurund and Kasamaran, which is the kind of ocean that's a little to the middle of the map, kind of southern middle. And then, of course, the Okayo Ocean, which separates Tianzi from Arcadia. So those are the edges of the map. That is, you know, in a map that a lot of times they show the world, that's the Pacific Ocean of the map, is the Okayo Ocean. Each of these oceans, there is a little bit of information I can mention about them before we turn into the, of course, continents. You know, we'll hit some things up here for each of these, and then we'll hit up the continents and some of the seas, and we'll, like, you know, talk about some of these things here. So yes, the Antakos Ocean, the southern part, it's also sometimes called the Ocean of Frozen Dreams. It is technically the largest body of water because it is the South Pole. There is no continental mass there, but there is a polar ice shelf. Kind of the opposite of what we would have on planet Earth, where we have a ice shelf in our North Pole, but we tend to have, or like ice on the North Pole, but we had to have an actual continent in our South Pole. It is the opposite for Golarion. The crown of the world is on the north, and, you know, just ice shelves in the south. Yeah. Icebergs broke off of it, of course. Again, very similar to what we have from the North Pole and stuff, with icebergs kind of floating down. And, you know, they're aquatic mammals and stuff. A lot of creatures that live there. There are some beings that live there. There are some Callow, which were transported to Golarion from the Callow Mahoi, which is the most populated moon of Brethda. Remember, our good old... We'll pop back to it here. I won't pop back to it here because that would realign everything there. I was going to pop back to the thing, but Brethda, the cradle, one of its moons. Yes, we've got some inhabitants of that moon that was transported there by magical accident, have made the depths of that place its home, and have lived there for several generations. That's one of the few major groups that are there. And certainly there's whales, megalodons, camarasauses, whaler jellyfish, basilosauruses, ghosts and animated dreams are drawn to that place from across the world for various reasons that are kind of speculated upon. So it is a very haunted place by more ephemeral things, and there are creatures that live on the ice sheets, including things like a powerful white dragon lives there, and a number of other creatures that it's kind of like taking over. So there's some ice trolls, ice giants, things like that, and a couple of more primitive humanoids that do gather there. The trolls and giants are the most common, but there aren't a lot of actual things living on this ice sheet. So this is the kind of area that, if you were ever to use it in a game, there isn't a lot there. There are story elements for there. I mean, there's a group of alien beings that have been settled on there because a magic accident threw them into the depths of the ocean there. There's a lot of very dangerous things. What's causing the ghosts and dreams to kind of enter there? You could have stories dealing with the white dragon that kind of rules over a good section of it, or some of the other dangerous things like the psychic aquatic giants which enslave people from the surface, or the ice trolls which are kind of degenerates, degenerated. They refer to them as a degenerate race of ice trolls because they just have gone even more feral and primal and have lost some of the intelligence of their troll brethren. Trolls have never been super smart, but they are a relative humanoid that has some intelligence. They tend to be very savage and not get along with other humanoids. They eat them a lot. It's one of the things that makes trolls very dangerous, is they don't seem to want to adapt to anything, but these are ice trolls that have kind of like gone even farther back into their primitive ancestry, not quite too animalistic, but certainly lost some of their intelligence they have. Probably don't use tools at all. Yeah. So it is a very interesting location. As you can see, each of these locations are there. The Arcadian Sea is that major sea. So that's the thing about the Arcadian Sea, is that when we talk about that one, because it is off of Avastian, which Avastian and Grund are two of the major continents that a lot of stuff and a lot of information is given about. If we look at this Golarion map, and let's switch over to another map here. Well, let's switch over to another map here. Let's do this one here, which I have to then expand out. But we'll use this one here. There's a very nice map here we can use here just a second to give an idea for more, which will be on this one for a little bit here. But you can see this map here. Avastian, Cameroon, and Grund are three major continents, and they tend to be the continents that we know the most about from a lot of things. Avastian has a lot of smaller nations. Both the nations I talked about, Druma and Ustalov in previous things, and a lot of the nations I could talk about now, come from Avastian. There are nations on Grund, there are nations on Cameroon, there are nations on TNZ, there are nations on Arcadia. Arcadia tends to have the fewest nations. TNZ, we have had a little bit of stuff about it, but to date this a little bit, this video is originally being streamed and then going to be uploaded before the TNZ book comes out, which will have a whole host of information about that region. So after this, at some period of time that this video is going out, just dating it a little bit, you can get a book about TNZ and find out a lot more about its various nations and stuff and dive into it. Sarasan has incredibly little information about it when I talk about that. Of course, Aslant is a lot of roots. So when we talk about this ocean here, this ocean is technically connecting up a major area of a lot of civilization on the known world of Golarion. Remember, Golarion is a world that has faced a number of apocalypses and basically gone to the shit. So this does eventually connect up with the sea to the south, very much similar to other seas. And these three continents basically take up this, with a number of very important seas going off of here. So, of course, the big thing here is, when we talk about it, is we have the ruins of Aslan is right in the center of there. We'll talk about that in a minute, but that is one of the big points about this ocean here. The other thing is there are connections to the Darklands. A lot of creatures in the Darklands, rather than just be corrupted because they live in the darkness, they're closer to that sealed god, and a lot of that god's influence has caused a lot of issues with those that live underground. So not only have they adapted to being a subterranean creatures with darker pigments and skins, or from blacks and white skins, like pure jet black or pure white skins and things like that, or grays, where a pigment has basically left their skins from being a subterranean creature. A lot of these groups also are driven to very terrible things because of the influence from a god of basically apocalypses whispers into their ears. So, yes. But there are a number of Darkland entrances into the Sightless Sea below, which the Sightless Sea is part of the Darklands. It's a body of ocean that is basically under the Arcadian Ocean, a very similar size to it, and kind of is actually like a underground sea that's about the same size as the Arcadian Ocean. So that's an interesting thing, that there is an ocean under the ground and under the continent within the crust. So there's a lot of entrances in there and various ways to get into the Darklands from here. Because of this very well inhabited area, a lot of people live here. Aquatic elves, gillmen, merfolk, so I'm never going to pronounce them right. Sohagan. I never pronounce them right. Do not try to correct me. I have made fun of that so many times in some of my other shows, whenever I mention them. But you know what I mean. The horrible shark slash deep sea fish monster people that, are very not pleasant. And, of course, the remnants of the Agathulu civilization, a.k.a. Avaliths of their kind, do exist within this area here. A lot of treasure hunters go into these areas because there's a lot of treasure to be found here from a lot of these things. So this is one of the major oceans because there's a lot there. The Emerald Sea, which we talked about, which is between Kazmarum and TNZ, with Sursen to the west, they have some major powers here along its borders. Places like the city-state of Goka on the TNZ's west coast is here as a major trade hub for this region. The nation of Kaladay on Kazmaroon is one of the major nations here. Basically, it is a pretty important place. There is at least a portal either to the Plane of Water or Nirvana, thought to be somewhere in the Emerald Ocean, because there's signs of things that would have come from one of those regions. This area here, though, is a very much more marine desert, just because of the nature of it, and the nature of the area here, too, with the currents and stuff. So you would have to look up the definition of what a marine desert is. I'm not going to go into the full breakdown of what that means. It just means there's a lot less creatures here. There are a lot fewer far between. It isn't a very well inhabited ecologically. It also means that, not a lot of stuff exists here as much. There is one group, the Caselias, which are, if you want to look them up, they look like a combination of merfolk, but with the octopi bottom. So they're top half of a humanoid, bottom half of a octopi. They have a kind of once had a empire in the northern ephemeral ocean, though again there is some dubious nature to their claims about that they once controlled it. Grindylows, Tritons, Soagan, Andros, Devilfish, Marrows, Krakens, Ecotorsos, Siokos are the sentients that inhabit here. There is stuff there, but not as much. And there's also Alo Mob, a trade city for aquatic races that is built into the shell of Belakmu the Blind Mother, a gigantic snail that travels across the floor here. So there is a city on a snail that exists in this area. You would want to look into, aquatic adventures. There is a book, Aquatic Adventures, that will give a little bit more information on this one. I recommend checking that out if you want to look into it. Published in 2017. It's a soft cover. It's originally for first edition, but it gives a lot of basic Gazetteer information, which doesn't change. The Obari Ocean, which is, of course, is the one that separates Cameroon and Garund. That one there, it's an area with a lot of storms, a lot of turmoil in the region there. It's got the Kelish Empire, Garund there, with the Kelish Empire on the south-central Cameroon. So kind of connecting up as a major power base in that continent. And it does connect up with the Inner Sea region, which is that northern sea area between Avastian and Garund, which we'll talk about when we talk about some seas. So yeah, it's a area that it has a one area that's very well known is the Obari Ice Forest. Sorry, where basically some gases are expelled from the deep, rushing to frigid waters, causing them to freeze and kind of make these strange, semi-organic crystalline shapes. Very beautiful, very disturbing. The crystals can crack and explode with compressed gases because basically superheated gases are pouring into like freezing waters and creating these kind of shapes in the water. There are sea serpents in here. Sea serpents are said to be good luck in this area. Sea dragons, living islands, demon storms, a lot of different things, even some merfolk that are said to live in that area. And it is a major kind of trade especially between places like, Goka on the continent, on the other side of there, trading with Kelish, Farunda, a lot of these other nations along the edges there. The storms don't stop trade. And finally, the other ocean that we want to talk about, the final one, is the Yokabio, which is, of course, what connects up Arcadia and TNZ, as you can see on the map here, from west of Arcadia to there. It's the second largest ocean, only second to the cold Antakaros at the southern hemisphere, or the southern pole. And traders from TNZ oftentimes will travel, honestly, east to get through stuff and go through this entire area. A lot of marine life lives there. It is a big area that a lot of waters travel between there, so it's got a lot of very great... oh, my God, the language just eludes me sometimes today. Flows. Currents. There we go. There are a lot of dangerous things that do live here, of course, and you have to travel across it. There's a trench, the Sintos Trench, which is home to thousands of underwater cities and numerous races that make their living there. Yeah. And a lot of groups that live there. The Sahuagin, again, not pronouncing them correctly, have a powerful empire in the depths of the trench and have the greatest number anywhere in Golarion there. So it's called Fury Deep for those that can't pronounce this name, which are not even giving to me. And it's got about 10,000 inhabitants in it. So it's a big old city in an empire of this race down there. So yeah. Anyway, that's the final of the oceans. Let's we'll move on maps then, because this map helped here with oceans. Here's a more fan-made map, which we'll adjust a little bit here. And open up a little bit here to give a little bit more. So, yeah. Here is yet another map. This is one that is indeed less official, but I wanted to show it off because it gives a kind of idea of the various types of terrain and the deserts and stuff that exist. And you can see the Eye of Abanago right there in the center. Gives an idea of it. And let's talk about a few of the minor continents that are out there. Let's talk about, of course, Aslant. I want to talk about Arcadia. Actually, I want to talk about the Crown of the World, Aslant, and Saracen at the moment here. Let's start with those three. Because Aslant we can talk about because it's a lost continent. It's a bunch of islands now. It was once an actual continent before a lot of it sank to the bottom of the sea and was destroyed. Basically devastated with the Earthfall and all the Age of Darkness coming about. Or when the, when the Starstone came flying into the planet. And the shattered parts of it yeah, the entire Starstorm didn't destroy Golarion. It got shattered. What's left of it still hit Aslant, and the continent was basically destroyed. Earthfall shattered it. And what's left of it still exists. It's, you know, it's a lot of mazes, cliffs, tors, jagged channels, honeycomb passages, remnants of ancient statues and buildings kind of can be found about there. It's quite accessible from sea level without use of ropes and pulleys. You know, there's wreckage of ships that's been raised from the seafloor in various areas. You know, and because the magic users of Adlant weaved a lot of powerful magics and stuff into their buildings, a lot of them still stay there. And of course, the Aslant Empire Aslanti Empire was what was there. That was the main history of it. As it is now, you know, it was magically and technologically the most advanced human culture ever. And there are artifacts that exist. You know, if you find something that's technological, it can exist because it could be Aslanti. It's still there. And a lot of magics and stuff, it exists there. Ion stones were first developed in Aslant. So yeah. There are some people descended from Aslanti. They're found in Taldanes and Chilaxians, most notably, because that's where most of the survivals of the Aslant continent went to. Yeah, unfortunately, you know, what remains of the continent is kind of just terrible. And most of the inhabitants are water-bellying creatures because, again, most of the continent has sunk. So, aquatic elves, gilmen, merfolk, they can explore, live there. There are dangers in those that still try to explore the place. It is definitely a good place for an adventure if you're going to have one. As, you know, there are some adventures that have been published, and I certainly could say, like, if you wanted to have an adventure on Aslant, exploring either some of the wrecked islands and stuff, or the places sunk beneath the waves, there could be plenty to find that would definitely kind of set out and give you information and show off a lot of things. So, Aslant, the Fallen, and there. The Crown of the World. I'm going to tell you here, there's actually a lot to the Crown of the World. I wanted to talk about it in this kind of section here of smaller talk about things, because it is, honestly, a pull. As you can see by the map here, it is technically connected to Avastian and connected to TNZ. So those two areas, you can travel from Avastian to TNZ via the Crown of the World. And it's a frozen desert that's basically the northern pole. There isn't a lot of permanent settlements or successful habitation except for a few hardy nomads. But there are a number of what could be called nations in the Crown of the World, whether hidden in peaks and things, like there's a dwarven nation, some giants and stuff, various confederacies of smaller villages and stuff, a number of like nomadic clans and stuff like that could be called their own thing. It's huge, you know. It is the North Pole. It is Arctic, mostly. The highest areas are the high ice. There's some boreal expanses and the Rime Frost Mountains. So a lot of it's just frozen wasteland. But there are people that live there, and could be adventures that you could have there. There are icy forests, ice shelves, mountains and hills, and a couple other landforms created by that. A number of... so there are some important sites to talk about that are there, and a trade route that is there, the Path of Agenhai, which is a trade route that goes from Avastian to TNZ across the Crown of the World. So, you know, there are stories to be there, and I think there is a entire adventure path which has you go there, which is, I believe, the Jade Regent. Yep. So the Jade Regent adventure path from Pathfinder First Edition has you cross that. So there are a lot of stuff there. It's not uninhabited. Plenty of ice living stuff there. No most human cultures, elven cultures that are there. The Irotaki humans and the I think it's Ilvenari elves are two of the most major ones there. Though, of course, the Dwarven Kingdom of Zapangura, White Dragons, Frost Giants, Wendigos, Remorads, a lot of highly things. Ruins from Aslant, Thassalon, and other groups that once tried to study or move there. And, of course, the Nameless Spire is there, which is the ruins of an ancient city there that kind of are mysterious, and not many people know about them. So certainly would be an interesting place to have an adventure in and knock yourself out. Yeah. And of course there is also the White Legion, which is an army of frost wights that gather in the crown of the world. But there are fear that she's in league with Baba Yaga. But hey, mysterious people that live at the crown of the world that have to deal with ice. Not that hasn't been seen before. 2011 that this was published, that this was mentioned. So I'm just going to say, I don't know the dates for other mysterious frost white similar creatures that live at the north, live at a place of a lot of cold. Let me say for sure. I'll mute myself here when I blow my nose. I was not going to do that, but I decided to. No nose blowing honks. I'm going to try to avoid those. I'm going to try to be a good boy. So the Crown of the World is a very interesting place, and there are places there. It's just very similar places. Now, a place that we don't know a lot about is, of course, Saracen. Not a lot has been published on this one. It's a lot of, like, words, and, you know, it was once connected to TNZ before the supercontinent broke apart. There might have remnants of the Serpent Folk Empire being there. There might be some culture of the Mianatan people might be descended from there. The reed boat culture that once existed in old ages. It's inhabited by a lot of things that have thought to have gone extinct in other areas of Golarion. A lot of marsupials, including the thylacine, come from there. And there are supernatural dangers, as there is a dread reputation. Those that venture the continent forget the details of the place shortly after departing. So, yeah, it's an unfortunate thing that, you know, there isn't a lot that we know about this continent. This is the most unknown one. It's kind of got a little bit like a connection to something, let's say, like Australia and our world with marsupials. But the thing is, again, don't know a lot about it. It is a mystery. Other than, you know, making a little bit Australia-y, you could come up with whatever you want for if you were ever going to use Saracen right at the point in time. No one really knows a lot about it. Alright, let's talk about, before we get into the main four continents, let's talk about Arcadia. Arcadia, I guess, is the next one, which is kind of smaller. Then I'll talk about Cameroon, Garund, Tianzi, and finally add up with Avastian, because Avastian is where most Pathfinder adventures take place in, and most, you know, information is provided. So Arcadia is west of it. It is a very long path. It's a long, dangerous sea journey to reach it from the inner sea area. The place is, not a lot is known about it, I'm going to be honest. There have been some connections with it. Some Avasti colonies have been made there in Arcadia. Tricelix, like Chilaxian and Dorian colonies have tried to be set up there, but that's more recent ages. There are inhabitants that live there. There are a number of nations that live there, a number of people. The place is not uninhabited. Zopatol is a nation of magic in southern Arcadia. That's one I could throw out there as a name. Or I butcher some names. Razzletan. It dominated Arcadia during the Age of Legends. It's still there, but it's kind of fallen out of a lot of things. So, like, it's a nation that still exists. It's just, not what it once. It was a great empire thousands and thousands of years ago. So it's an empire that kind of fell to grace long ago. Very Roman Empire-y. Once controlled a vast empire and then kind of fell slowly but surely over thousands of years into things. So there are a number of Vastian colonies, of course. There's like a bunch of those there. There's a bunch of different humanoids that live there. There is an Arcadian human ethnicity. There are 4 groups for humans that live there. The Kasari, Malek, Kalani, and Ophorcerians. Again, I'm going to butcher these names, so please forgive me if I do them. So a lot of groups of people, they live there, and various groups that live there. So, other things that are there are non-human populations. Strix, the owl-like humanoids, live there. Skinwalkers, descendants of were creatures, live there. Sasquatches, Quaddles, they're aquatic ninjos, fire giants, shadow giants. There are halflings that live there. Humans, halflings, skinwalkers, and weirwoods are the other one too. Are the most populous sentient humanoids, intelligent humanoids. Or intelligent creatures, I should say, not just humanoids. So there are a bunch of them, but, like, if you're going to go and have adventures in Arcadia, it's probably just going to be humans and halflings, mainly. With some skinwalkers and weirwoods, too. It's just a situation where didn't have any other major intelligent humanoid races, like on, let's say, our good friend Avasti, which we'll be talking about. Why don't we switch maps? We've been on this map for a while. I got a couple more maps that we can take a look at. So let's look at this one. So yeah, it's very much an interesting thing that, like, this area here certainly has not a huge population in a way. Let's talk Casmaron, which Casmaron is, of course, a large continent east of Avastian and Garund. It is across the sea from Tianzi. It is politically dominated by the Empire of Kelish. So if I ever talk about the Empire of Kelish, they are pretty much the main controller of Casmaron and the continent. Yeah. So there's a separation between the two continents. Taldor's World Edge Mountains kind of separate them from Avastian. And it's got, it kind of separates it out. Yeah. If we talk about the Empire of Kelish, it is the major nation. And it's not that there aren't other kingdoms there that exist. There are a bunch of ancient kingdoms which exist there too. It's just that there aren't a huge amount of them. The other one is, of course, the Impossible Kingdom of Veruda, and Cardia, which is the westernmost. It's connected with the Kelish Empire at kind of its west. So, again, it's part of the Impossible Kingdoms. It's this entire region there. And, there isn't a lot here. It's, when I talk about it, the reason I'm kind of like talking about it this way is there are plenty of territories, lands, and stuff to visit. But it's that, unlike a lot of some of these other nations where there are smaller nations built out of a lot of wildlands or, you know, many different nations. Casmeron is dominated by, like, pretty much 2 major nations. And these 2 major nations make up the majority of Casmeron. And if we remove the Kellish people and the Vruda people, there isn't a lot of people left over there that aren't under these 2 areas. So, yeah. There are 3 human ethnicity, the Kellishtites, the Varundi, and the Casimar. There are other descendants from there, from other groups. Geniekin, particularly Suli happen there. Vanaras, Vishkanyas are pretty big in the area. Yeah. And Ulfrin settlers and some settlers from Tian. Ulfrin being a human ancestry and Tianben being that. So we get like some of the Genikins, Vanarans, and Vishkanyas. Those are big groups there. But really it's another human-dominated land. You have to remember that, you know, dwarfs come from the Darklands originally, but they were not influenced by the Dark God. They managed to resist it and escaped as the Dark God's influence grew. That's why they came to the surface. Elves are aliens, which left the planet during the Cataclysm and only came back in a couple thousand years ago after everything had settled post, you know, Earthfall. Halflings have been around. And gnomes are from the Feywild originally. So a lot of the most dominant and most common of ancestries, there's a reason why we can say like, oh, that makes sense that why humans are dominant. Humans were left alone to just screw their way across the planet when a lot of stuff happened. So the northern steppes of Casmeron do have some other weird things, like giant kangaroos, twice the size of normal kangaroos, that roam in herds that you can hear from miles away. So that's an interesting little fact there that I like, that I pointed out. Normally I can ignore them. So that's Casmeron. There's 2 big nations here. I will probably talk about these nations at some point in time, and that will take up most of Casmeron talking about it. Grund. So Grund is a southern continent. Let's switch over again. One more map here. I won't adjust this one. I'll have that. We have 2 more maps that we can check out, so we'll do this one for Grund and Tianzi. So it's the southern continent. It had been a heart of civilization in the hemisphere. The Cyclops Empire that once ruled a lot of Golarion comes from this area. They, of course, competed with the Aslanti people, and a couple other ancient nations that were destroyed, basically, when the Star Sun came and Earthfall occurred. There are some nations still there, too. The Assyrians, the Kapatish, and the Holomog. And, you know, these tend to be on the outer edges of the landmass. The inner area is a dangerous and wild place. There's the Mwangi Expanse, the Mana Wastes between Nex and Geb. The Eye of Abagando, the permanent hurricane, which is off one of the edges of it. So this is a region that is very dangerous. And again, there are nations here. I mentioned a few of them. Hey, the Shackles, which, again, dating this a little bit because they'll come out at the same time. Buccaneers of Shackle Sea takes place in the Shackles. Granted, a lot of people settled that area, but that is on the west kind of interior area. There are Geb, Akenstar, Nex. These are pretty major nations that, you know, you can find things going on about. Especially Alkenstar, which has problems with magic. So you know what they invented? Guns. Guns come from Alkenstar. So if you ever talk about a gunslinger or anybody that uses any of those things, Alkenstar is one that does it. They don't trade out a lot of their gun technology. They trade out their easy stuff. But they have very advanced technology because you know what they had problems with? Magic. You know why? The Mana Wastes. A dead magic regions. You know, they invented firearms because of the Mana Waste, which is a dead magic area in there. So, Humans, again, are a very prominent group there, with Grundy Kelishite as being the kind of stock there, but there are Mwangi-descended people there. Elves are prolific in this area, too. They're the wild elves that basically stayed behind in the Mwangi expanse during Earthfall and survived there. So these Mwangi elven tribes, they've become very culturally distinctive, and there are groups of them that have their own different cultures because they've had time to develop. But there are some of the elves that stayed behind during Earthfall rather than flee to another planet. We'll talk about elves. I do want to talk about elves and their history. There are dwarves that have colonized the place after emerging from the Darklands and Evastian. That's the thing is, dwarves emerged from the Darklands in the Evastian area. And so those that have left Evastian have settled there, and they've been there for a long time. There are 2 halfling cultures indigenous to the area. There are gnomes that are scattered throughout the continents with some high populations. Again, gnomes as being in it. Orcs are rare there, but haven't found there. Goblins are very common to the Shackles and some of the islands around there, with a little bit in the Mwangi Expanse in the Mana Wastes and stuff, as races which tend to have a little bit more savageness to them, but can find civilization, especially more in the modern version of Golarion, as in the last kind of decades, things have driven culture forward and unity forward in a lot of these groups. So there are a lot of people that live there, definitely. There are kingdoms that were lost there. There's a lot of, places geographically that you can point out with various rivers, rakes, mountains, different jungles that are separate from each other, and a couple other places that can be talked about. Now, we do have to talk about the northernmost third of Grund is considered part of the Inner Sea region. Southern Grund is a little less explored. It's not a trade route to Verura or Tianzi. There isn't a lot of exploration. So, the Mwangi Expanse dominates a lot of the interior of southern Grund. So we already have the Mwangi Expanse dominating the center of Grund in general, but the southern area, even along the coastline, tends to be kind of a little out there. There are humans, elves, Aasimar, catfolk, and Gripply all down there, but it's just one of those things is that when it comes to a lot of there are some nations down there, but they tend to be like coastal ones and stuff too, and they tend to be less major nations, major powers. When we talk about something like Chelix, Taldor, and when we talk about the regions that were in Cameron with their Casmaron, with Kelish and Vruda, those are major nations. They tend to be global nations and connect up with a lot of other continents and stuff. It's just unfortunate that Southern Grund's nations tend to be less connected, less out there. Not that they don't have some level of civilization they've been building, but they're just not as developed, not as connected with the outside world. Just because their situation puts them in an area that trade routes don't really go that way. It's a lot easier to sail through the Inner Sea rather than to go down along the southern coast there. It unfortunately just is for trade routes. But that's Grund. Let's talk about Tianzi, which Tianzi is referred to the Dragon Empires oftenly. It has very similar vibes to our Asia. So that's the best thing to say about it. Like, when we were talking about Grund, again, a lot of these continents have some similarities to other continents that we have. Like, when we talked about them, certainly Saracen matches very heavily with Australia. The crown of the world could be kind of like our Antarctica, even though it's in the north. Arcadia could be the Americas. Vastian could be Europe. The thing is, Grund, Casmaron, and Tianzi take up qualities of a lot of it. It's sort of like Tianzi would be the far eastern Asia. Casmeron kind of fills in that Middle Eastern, a little bit of that kind of Western Asia kind of territories, where Garund is also a little bit of an African flavor. There is certainly, cultural-wise, comparing it, there are some comparisons between cultures that we know and the cultures that developed here. It's one of those things as people built off of cultures that we know a lot of times when they design things, they just do it in different, interesting ways. When I'm talking about Grund there, I can certainly point out the nation of Osirian in the north, which is feels very Egyptian. They have pharaohs and dynasties like that, and have their own unique faiths and stuff, along with some of the faiths of the normal regions. Things like Nethys and Pharasma, they have some of their own various deities and stuff. And it is a very equivalent to ancient Egypt, but it exists into this more modern-day version of Golarion. So it's an interesting juxtaposition, if I would talk about that nation, where it feels like it's what happens if the ancient Egyptian empires never fell, or the civilization never fell, and it existed into a Renaissance era. That's kind of where it kind of exists as. So, when we talk about Tianzi, yes, we talk about this nation over here. It does, it is one of the larger continents in Golarion. It has the northern route that you can go across the crown of the world in order to get to other trade routes. Of course, a bunch of lost nations exist here too that you can always explore stuff on. Yeah. So, there have been 3 continent-spanning empires across Tianzi. Langhua ruled up until about a century ago, until it kind of fell apart and broke. So that's actually a pretty recent thing, is that the empire basically had a rulership over Tian 3. It was the third great empire. So now there are a lot of successor nations under it. The successor states that kind of rule Tianzi. There are about 16 of them that control the continent as it is now. So yeah, that's the thing, is if we look at them, they are kind of, in a way, feuding with each other. It is coincidental, perhaps, that Langhua collapsed following natural disasters that occurred with the death of Eridan in 4606. Coincidence? Maybe. But basically, the empire that basically controlled this continent broke apart. There are 16 nations, so if you are visiting Tianzi, you are visiting one of these 16 nations that control the continent currently. Actually 17, I think. Let me see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 14, 15, 16. The other 16, so 16 nations. I don't know why one just sits out weirdly in this list. In a weird spot for it. So, yeah. The mainland is incredibly large. Again, perhaps one of the largest in the area. Let's see here. The southern half is dominated by the Valshimi jungles and some big mountain ranges. There's a lot of Nagashi down in that area. So there is a lot of large areas. Of course, again, you would not be amiss to research and look into Langhua as a major source of culture. Because, again, it's only been gone for like 100 or so years. It was a great nation that basically conquered the entire continent, fell apart into these 16 nations now. And there have been other great empires that have existed, that over generations, that have conquered the entire thing. So, humans of the Tian ethnicity are here. There are some differentiations between it. Tian Dan, Tian La, Tian Min, Tian Xing, Tian Shu are the 5 major subgroups and most of those dominate the successor states of Longhua. Again, successor states are the 16 nations which control TNZ post the fall. So these 5 human ethnic subgroups, which are all Tian ethnicity, which break down then, these 5 subgroups basically dominate different regions. Yeah. There are a number of nations that... there are other people that exist within here. We'd have to look at every nation here because, again, we're talking 16 nations here. And I'll probably wait to cover a lot of stuff on TNZ and talk about some of these interesting nations until after the major book comes out, because then we can have some upgrades in that, and I can perhaps look into reading that book and getting it to check it out. It's a PDF of it. At very least, there will be more information to be shared. But it is a culturally diverse area that has had this history of the entire continent being conquered together and being united. And again, the last one wasn't long ago. Only about a century ago, in modern-day Golarion timeline, was there a continent-spanning empire. So certainly, there is a lot of interconnectivity. Of course, there's a lot of hostility and battles between them. And certainly these successor states have had their share of battles between them over the entire thing. But, again, a lot of connections together that you can kind of look at. So, let's go to the final map I chose out here for maps. Let's see if I have to adjust this a little bit here. We can adjust a little bit, make it a little bit better sized. We want to talk about Avastian. Now, I was saving this for last for basically 2 reasons. Like, okay. Little side tangent here, but it's related to it. If you ever talk about the Forgotten Realms and Faerun, Faerun is not the name of the planet. Faerun is the name of the continent. This is the D&D world. Forgotten Realms is a setting. It's a very common one. A lot of people use it. A lot of people know it. A lot of adventurers use it. It's basically Europe in a world that is very much more connected with Earth. I'm going to say Toril, which is the planet, very few people, not as many people know that, is very Earth analog. Golarion has that too. And it can be proven because, hey, some Earth is connected to Golarion because of lore reasons and because of lore and an adventure where you go into World War I to help fight against Baba Yaga, who travels between dimensions. Golarion is connected to Earth, so very, very much so. If you use the transitive properties and you believe that kind of stuff, Golarion is attached to Faerun. Hey, it's in the same cosmology just because of goddamn Earth is in both of those. Thanks, Earth. Anyway, regardless, what I'm saying there for this entire explanation is that Avastian is the basically bit about that European equivalent there. It is the most heavily settled area on the planet. There are a lot of major cultures. Chelix and Talador are huge powers. Andorian, Mathun, Thassalon was here, which is the other great nation. So it was as the Aslanti, Thassalon, and the Cyclops nation were the really big nations that kind of fell during Earthfall, and all of them had massive amounts of technological and magical developments that made them dominant for various reasons. So that's the kind of thing you think about it. There were 3 very dominant, powerful nations which had very huge developments in both magic and technology that existed on a planet, and then they all fell during a basically cataclysmic apocalyptic event, and the rebuilt civilization has mostly been in Avastian. Avastian's where the elves returned, where the dwarves emerged. Even halflings were still there. Thanks, halflings. It's always been nice to be with you. There are some not lost nations like Thassalon that are here, but there are a lot of major nations that are here. I talked about Uslav and Taldar, which are on the borders of Lake Encarthia, the huge inner lake in the center of Avastian, Druma and Ustalav. But as I said, a lot of big nations and a lot of nations exist here. It is a very populated area. So a lot of these nations are also very well developed, as there has been a lot more information on them. But it is home to one of probably the most diverse populations. Humans, elves, dwarves, gnomes, halflings, goblins, orcs, countless other races. Amongst humans, of course, you've got the Kelids, the Shoanti, the Ufin, the Varisian ethnic groups, with the Chlexian and Taldane people being often descended from Aslanti human groups. So, again, we have just this huge groups of people that are, existing in an area. Avastian tends to be that kind of a little bit of a melting pot place of like a lot of people together in a lot of countries. It's not always the most stable because of this, unfortunately. And it is kind of set on the ruins of ancient empires and stuff there. There have been lost kingdoms in this area that we can talk about. And it is just again, we're talking places in Golarion. It is the most well-developed. That's why we do want to mention, like, there are a number of big, major seas also in Golarion that we do want to talk about. In the center of Casmaroon, of course, is the Castrovodian Sea. You can see it on the map there. It is a sea at the center of Casmaroon, a major location. The Fever Sea is kind of that area south of the Shackles. Not very easy. Oh, maybe one of the other maps is better for the Shackles. Let me see here. None of these maps are really great for the Shackles, unfortunately. But the big old circle in the northern Grund, where the Eye of Bango is, it's basically the south. The Fever Sea comes up for stuff like when I'm doing Skulls and Shackles. Of course, the Inner Sea is one of the major regions because it's a major trade route. A lot of trade comes from TNZ, going west. Around, of course, Casmaron, and then through there, in between Grund, Casmaron, and Avastian, to that Inner Sea region. Chelix is in the Inner Sea region. Osirian, Talador is off the shores of it. Absalom, Andoran, they're very powerful nations. 6 of the most powerful nations in Golarion are on the shores of the Inner Sea, and they have huge naval battles and stuff. So it's that region that's in between the Grund and Avastian. That's on that map there. That is the Inner Sea. And again, we talk about huge nations that are there, that exist in this area, that make a very powerful place. And it make it that it is, honestly... the area was, before Earthfall, the continent had been joined by a land bridge here. It was collapsed, basically, and then allowed the sea to create, which has become this trade hub. So the Inner Sea region is a major region. It is often talked about. It will often be mentioned. If I talk about any of these nations on the edge here, we will talk about it. So yeah. There's the Ivory Sea, which is the kind of eastern, northern sea, kind of in between the TNZ and the Crown of the World there. The Shining Sea, which separates Casmaron from the Crown of the World in the north. Our friend the Sightless Sea, which I did mention. We should mention it exists again. It will be talked about. I'll probably have to go over some more stuff for this. It's linked to the Arcadian Ocean via reverse water spots known as the Braid, which leads up to the Inverted Sea, which is a thing too. Yeah. It's, very interesting that there is this complexity in the water systems in there. So, anyway, a couple of the seas. The Songul Sea near Tianzi, Steaming Sea off of Vastian, kind of in the north, and the Velashmi Sea in the southern hemisphere near Tianzi. So that's some seas that I'm including there, just because, again, I wanted to include them really because of the Inner Sea. I mean, the Inner Sea is the big reason to it. But that's basics of Golarion. I think that handles most of what we talk about when we talk about Golarion here. I'm hoping it gives you a better idea of the world of Golarion and the planet of it. It is, again, there are plenty of maps and stuff out there that you can check out to get more information and take a look at some of this stuff. Get an idea of what exists and these different things and how the water and stuff. And I gave you the initial impression, the initial 2011 image of the world map of Golarion. That is in the pretty much the official map if you're ever going to look at it from the Inner Sea World Guide, page 204. It is the closest thing that, like, if you ever find a map that's based on that, it's based on information. It is the, again, actual map that they have shown off. Oh, yeah, that's what I'm doing here. But Golarion is an interesting planet with a lot of history and heritage. And yes, you can take comparisons to Earth. Reasons behind it, you know, there are similarities that have developed in similar regions. Talking about the various different human cultures, because human culture is humans are dominant in the planet. We fuck. You know, Golarion humans, just like us, you know, they do their thing. They spread a lot, and it's not to say that there aren't other intelligent races. And certainly, like, when we look at Avastian, it's a good example of, like, the kind of melting pot the world can become. It's just that a lot of beings come from there. That's why, like, in Grund, of course, we have the elves that remain, but dwarfs have moved in there. Others have moved in there. It's becoming more. Places like Kazmaron, probably slowly. Tianzi has their own cultures and peoples that have lived there, so they've developed on their own. And, you know, then, of course, you've got, like, Arcadia and Saracen and the Crown of the World, which are very out there and stuff, you know. Not that the people or beings don't live there, it's just that they're so separated out or so unconnected. It would be great to see more of these things, and I'm glad we're getting a TNZ book and we're getting more stuff on some of these areas in Golarion. I think that's a great thing for development in Pathfinder 2nd edition. And as more of it comes, we can talk about more of these interesting nations and the kind of adventures you can have there. Like, I can point out Aslan, the continent. I can instantly plan out and talk about all the different kinds of adventures you can have there in these ruins and wreckages, and all kinds of adventures against threats or exploring or discovery. You know, all different things which could be very interesting to tell. So, Golarion is a very diverse world. It's a world that has some good development. More development's great, but we can talk about it, and I will talk about more of the nations of Golarion in the future. It is a fun thing to talk about and introduce these places in the world that can have interesting storylines. It's one of the things I do like to talk about is just because I use a pre-made world a lot of times doesn't mean I can't make it my own and put my own flair on it. I can just be creative still too, because you're only given a basics of this area. How you represent it and how you really show it off and how you play around with it and what might be there can be an interesting challenge of itself. It can be very fun to make your own worlds, but it's also fun to just take something and run with it and see where you can develop your own version of it. And it can be fun. And it honestly also helps that it cuts down some of your work when you're doing that. Other thing to mention about Golarion, I forgot to. Atmosphere is pretty much the same as ours, and it is actually equivalent mass, diameter, and gravity to our Earth. It's exactly comparable. 1 to 1. for a reason. 1 year Earth orbit, standard atmosphere. Think about it. I talked about it already. But anyway, I'm going to get going. That was a good fun to leave off there. That was a good episode where we talked about all this. Remember, we are now on a Tuesday, Thursday for around 1 p.m. in the afternoon for streaming on Twitch. Eventually go up on YouTube. And if you want to join live, whatever you want to comment on. And for Saturdays at 11 a.m. So a morning Saturday session of Talking Tabletop. If you want to check those out, join me. It's fun. If you're just checking these out on YouTube, thanks for joining and checking it out. I hope you enjoy all these and learn some stuff from it. I try my best to get some research done and set them all up and display a lot of information and talk about a lot that you might want to learn about. I enjoy doing these and deep diving into things. And I hope you enjoy them too. So throw your support, Twitch, YouTube, either place. I do have other things, Discord, Twitter. I do have a Patreon. I do have to update that. But anyway, I'm going to get going. I'm going to say thank you. More Pathfinder future, more other tabletop in the future. And for all of you out there who join me, regardless if it's on Twitch or on YouTube, I bid all of you a farewell out there. And hey, check out Golarion. It's a cool world. I recommend it.